Lamentations chapter 4, verse number 1. How is the gold become dim? How is the most fine gold changed? The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter? Even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones. The daughter of my people is become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. The tongue of the sucking child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask bread, and no man breaketh it unto them. They that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. Now, we find here in the first couple of verses of this chapter. Now, keep in mind, I probably need to give you a little bit of review. Every one of these chapters is independent. So this is not chapter 1 and then you go immediately into chapter 2 with the context. Chapter 1 is its own individual lamentation. If you remember, we talked about this at the beginning. The lamentation is a mournful statement. The idea is, basically, here's the gist of it. Jeremiah is basically at the funeral for Judah, the people of God that are in the southern kingdom. And he's making a, what would we call it? I guess is it a eulogy? Is that the word we use today? Where he's at the funeral and he's making statements about God, about the condition of the nation, about how we got to where we are in his time. So that's what we are. Lamentations chapter 1 is one lamentation all by itself. Lamentations chapter 2, it's its own lamentation. Same thing. Here we are in chapter 4. We're not just continuing on. It's the same time period. And so to some degree, all of it ties together. But this is meant to be a brand new independent thought that stands on its own separate from what we dealt with. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. If you'll notice at the first of chapter 4, and I always struggle with this because I want to read the Bible the way that it's meant to be read. And I always think of it in my mind. I think, okay, this is an exclamation mark or an exclamation point. This is not a question mark. And yet I still find myself when I read it, I struggle to accent the difference. In Lamentations chapter 4, verse number 1, we're not asking questions. Does everybody see that? I know that sounds trivial, but it's not trivial. It's an important thing. He's not asking, how did this happen? He's standing in awe as he looks at it. Okay? So Jeremiah is not sitting there still clueless as to what went wrong. That's not what this is about. This is not Jeremiah saying, well, what did we do wrong? Why is God upset with us? Why are we in the shape we're in? He's not asking any of that stuff. He already has all those answers. He's quite clear on why this is the way that it is. He's rather standing in awe, seeing it right before his eyes. Now let me make this statement just because I think this will help us. He's not in awe because he didn't expect this to come. Because all through the book of Jeremiah, if you go read, and I encourage you to do that, especially after we've studied Lamentations, you ought to go read Jeremiah, and I think things will tie together much better. And maybe hindsight, maybe we should have gone through Jeremiah and then Lamentations. But you can imagine if I would have gone through Jeremiah, I might have died before you got to Lamentations. And so here we are in Lamentations. You need to go home and read Jeremiah. And I think you'll see that Jeremiah knew these days were coming. But hearing God tell you that the judgment's coming and standing there looking at the judgment once it's come are two different things. I wonder how many of you on 9/11, I mean, we've heard sermons, all our lives, all our Christian lives, I guess I should say, about one of these days, the judgment of God's going to come on this nation. We've heard that, we've heard that, we've heard that. But when we saw, I'm not saying this was the judgment of God necessarily, but I'm saying the hand of God, regardless of how you want to look at it, the hedge was removed for a short space of time on the country. Whether you want to say God was responsible or God let it happen, either way, God got the form and signed His name to it and said it's okay for it to happen, or it would not have happened. I know that's rough, but it's true. Go read the book of Job. You'll see that that's a fact. So God let it happen. So regardless of what you want to call it, I know this. When I was setting out, I had just started a brand new job. I think that Monday, and I think it was a Tuesday. Is that right? It was a Tuesday. Does anybody remember? It was a Tuesday when that happened, I think. So here I am, the second day on this new job. They don't even have a space carved out for me yet. I'm out in the middle of the aisle working, and my supervisor's telling me, he said, hey, come here, there are planes flying into the towers. And okay, hearing messages about one of these days God's going to let something happen to this country, that was completely different than going home that night and watching the news and seeing airplanes fly into the tower and watching people run from the buildings and watching all the smoke and watching, I will never forget the videos of people jumping from those buildings. It just blows my mind. So can you kind of identify with Jeremiah a little bit here? It's not that he didn't know it was coming. It's not that he's surprised that judgment came. It's that when he's standing there looking at it and observing the scene, there was nothing that could prepare him for this. Now, I say all that to say this to you. If the Lord tarries His coming, and if you live long enough, or if I live long enough, we're going to see other things. And we can stand up on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, and we can get on the street corners, and we do, and we can say, hey, repent or perish. We can tell folks the judgment of God's coming, and people hear it, and we dismiss it. Sometimes we minimize it. But one of these days, if the Lord tarries and we live long enough, we're going to see something that our jaws are going to drop again, and we're going to stand in awe, and we're not going to be saying, well, how did this happen, or why did this happen? We're going to know the answers, but we're going to be, it's an exclamatory statement. Wow, we're in awe. I just can't believe that it looks like this. That's where Jeremiah is, okay? So I'm trying to give you a little heads up ahead of time just so you can kind of put yourself in the shoes of Jeremiah and see what he's saying. So verse 1, he's not asking, he's making a statement of surprise, if you will, about the gold and how dim it is. Now keep in mind that when Solomon built the temple, everybody was in awe of that temple. It was sparkly, it was shiny, it was beautiful. I don't know, it might have been, may very well have been, the most beautiful structure ever built by man on this earth. I would say, especially if you're a Jewish person and it was your heritage, your culture, when you looked at that temple, you were proud of that temple. That was an accomplishment that God had given your people and allowed you to do. And when you looked at that, you stood in awe of the gold and all the stuff. Just Solomon, there was no better builder for that temple than Solomon. David wanted to build it, and maybe in some ways David would have done a good job. I think David was the preparer of the temple, but Solomon was the builder. But now here we are. How is the gold? The gold was so beautiful and everything about it was so beautiful. And now we look and things are so dim. Do you see what's going on here? We remember when it was, the gold was so, it was a shine off of it. It's just beautiful. Just, wow, what amazing look. And he says this, how is the most fine gold changed? The finest of the gold. And he said it's changed now. It's dim. It's lost its luster. And when we look at the city surrounding us, things are burnt down to the ground. Things are torn up. It's a wreck. And it's not Jeremiah saying, how did it get here? It's Jeremiah in awe looking at it. And look, we all want, sometimes because we're pre-trib rapture, we believe we're going to get out of here before Daniel's 70th week. Sometimes people will call us escapists, or we want to escape, the judgment of God or anything of that sort. And I got to tell you, I do want to escape it. If I could escape any tribulation going forward the rest of my life, part of me would say, sign me up for that. The spiritual part of me would say, well, no, actually it's good for me, so I guess I'll take some, but you know what, let's do this in a proper balance. But you know what, we're probably not going to escape everything. Now look, I don't want you saying, well, who's the Antichrist? And Every new president we get, have you ever noticed this? Every new president we get, that person's the Antichrist. There's some news article or some YouTube video created that's the Antichrist. It was President Obama, he's the Antichrist. Well, no, he's not. He's not the Antichrist. Now it's President Trump, he's the Antichrist. Well, no, he's not. He's not the Antichrist. You need to go read your Bible on the Antichrist. We're not looking for President Obama or President Trump or President Clinton or President Clinton Part 2 or President Clinton Part 3 or whatever we're going to get. It's not the Bushes. The Bushes are not the Antichrist. But look, I'm not telling you to look for the Antichrist, but I am telling you this. If you hang in there long enough, you're going to see some scary things come to pass, things that surprise you. I'm surprised that we don't know what bathroom to use. That surprises me. I never would have thought, even as an unsaved person, it never would have entered my mind that we would have a day where somebody would walk up to two doors, one with a perfectly good sign that says men and one with a perfectly good sign that says women, and he wouldn't know which one to go into. I would have never thought we'd get there. I would have never thought I would be nervous taking my family into a store and using public restrooms. If my family's going to the restroom, I like the family restroom because it's one and you can close the door and you know who's in there. You see what I'm saying? I never would have thought that. There's a lot of things that are going on today I never would have thought. I think it's going to get worse. Jeremiah's looking at the scene and he says, how did it get, and standing in awe of the appearance. Now look what he says here in verse 1 because I need to hasten a little bit. He says, the stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. Now think about it. They're poured out in every street. Now what does that mean? Now I'm a literalist, meaning I take the Bible literally unless God gives me some reason in there not to do so. I don't see a reason not to take verse number 1 literally. I think what he's saying is the stones that made up the sanctuary have probably not just been one just taken off of another. These things have been busted up, and I don't know whether the enemies grabbed, parts of the rock to take it away. I don't know how it worked, but this thing's just spread out all over the place. It's not just like they can go just pick up one stone and set it back on top of the last one and then and rebuild it. It's not like that at all. This thing's destroyed. Look at verse number 2. It said, the precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold. Just in case we were thinking verse number 1 was really, really bad, but when we get to talking about the people, it's just people. No, he said it's comparable to fine gold. Here's what it is. These people, it wasn't, so in the people's eyes, they looked at the gold on the building. In God's eyes, he looked at the people. And the people were comparable to fine gold. So God says, look at the people. How are they esteemed? Look at this. As earthen pitchers. So they were fine gold, but now it's like the potter setting some clay on a wheel and shaping something. And he said that's what the people look like now in comparison to the fine gold that they looked like before the judgment of God came. So you all look at the sanctuary and you say, wow, the sanctuary used to be so much more beautiful than that. Look how dim it is now. Look how the stones of the sanctuary are just spread out all through the streets of the city. And so they look at the building, but God says, hold on a second, look at the people. When I looked at the people, they were as fine gold, but now they're just vessels. They're just earthen pitchers. They're just mud shaped into various vessels or shapes. And he said, what a horrible thing. Now he's going to describe that to us just a little bit. Now this may seem odd to you. I'm going to try to give you some things to think about. I preached, I don't remember how many years back it's been. It was a Mother's Day message, I think, one of the classics, but preached about ostriches as mothers. And I'll try to give you a little bit on that here in just a minute to show you what he's trying to get across. But look at verse number 3. Even the sea monsters. So he's pointing to nature. And he says even some of these creatures, they know how to be nice. Even some of these creatures, these created monsters, these sea monsters, it said the moms know how to be nice to the children and take care of the children, and they naturally take care of their young ones. And so he's talking about the moms feeding the babies in verse number 3. But look what he says about the people. So he says that's the if you look at nature, that's how these sea monsters do it. But look at verse number 3. He says, the daughter of my people has become cruel. I think as we get closer to the end times, the spiritual markers for the end times are that people are lovers of their own selves, right? We're not looking for earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars and stuff like that. We're watching the spiritual temperature or condition of the people. And when you get a place where children are disobedient to their parents, have you ever seen any of that? Anybody ever see that? Okay. You get to a place where children are disobedient to their parents, and where parents have lost, the Bible talks about natural affection. Things that should just come naturally. Like if a mom gives birth to a baby, you shouldn't have to go to that mom in the hospital bed and say, okay, let me show you something in this book. This book says that it's a good thing for you to love your child. You shouldn't have to do that. There should be something, it should have already been growing for 9 months. The mom's already getting attached to the baby. You all have seen that happen. So when we get to a place where we've lost things that should be natural and we're replacing them with things that are unnatural, then you know we're in a bad spot. Well, that's what he's talking about in verse number 3. He said, the daughter of his people have become cruel. And in the context, what he's talking about, moms with their children. Now watch the verse, okay? Watch the verse here with me. Verse number 3. He said, the daughter of my people is become cruel, and he's going to give us an illustration. Like the ostriches in the wilderness. Now, have you ever heard a statement sort of like this where you ought to be an example to other people, but you ought to be an example of what to do and not an example of what not to do? You ever hear something like that? I want you to be an example, but I want you to be an example of how to do it, not an example of how not to do it. Look, if you go to work tomorrow and your boss comes up to you and says, I just want you to know you are an example to all of the employees of what not to do, that's not a good thing. The ostrich is an example of motherhood. A very horrible example of motherhood. Let me just give you a few things because we've been through this before. I don't want to necessarily do it right now. Just hold your place in Lamentations and go to the book of Job. We'd probably need to do this at least. The book of Job, and look at chapter 39, I believe is where I want to go. Job 39. I'll just mention a couple of things to you, and then we'll hasten to the end. Job 39. Look with me, if you will, to verse number... look at verse number 17 first. No, look at verse number 14. Verse 13, that's what we need. Gavest thou the goodly wings unto the peacocks, or wings and feathers unto the ostrich, which leaveth her eggs in the earth, and warmeth them in the dust, and forgetteth that the foot may crush them, or that the wild beast may break them. She is hardened against her young ones, as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear, because God hath deprived her of what? Wisdom. Neither hath he imparted to her what? Understanding. All right, so here's the motherhood of the ostrich. She leaves her eggs in the earth. Well, that's not so bad. Well, hold on a second. She puts them in the earth. Now, it's said, I don't know how accurate this is or how variable it can be, that they usually have a pit about 2 feet deep and 10 feet wide. And they put their eggs, this is the craziest thing. I probably should preach this again one of these days real soon, but an ostrich will put her eggs in with another female ostrich's eggs. They just put them together. So my eggs with your eggs, who cares? We'll just put them in the earth together, and I don't know how they know whose is whose or if they even care. She warms them in the dust, and fewer than 10% survive. That's pretty good parenting. She causes danger herself. If you look at verse number 15, while this whole warming them in the dust, just put them in the ground, leave them there. Verse number 15 says, well, when she puts them in the earth, she forgets that the foot may crush them. You can see why only about 10% of these things survive. They just put the egg in the ground, just, whatever. And, animals are stepping on them. She's stepping on them. Who cares? The eggs are cracking. What does it matter? Not just that, or that the wild beast may break them. So wild beasts coming through, they break the eggs. No big deal. We're going to end up with 1 out of 10 at the end. So what's the problem? She has no affection. Verse number 16, she is hardened against her young ones. That's a dangerous place to be. She treats them as though they are foreign, so she places them in a nest with the other eggs. She refuses to care for them. We just read about that in Lamentations 4. She leaves them to care for themselves. One researcher said this: upon the least distant noise or trivial occasion, she forsakes her eggs or her young ones, to which perhaps she never returns. Now, does that sound like the modern mom? She hears a noise in the distance. Oh, that could be trouble. I'm leaving the eggs. Not get the eggs and I'm leaving. Leave the eggs, go off, who cares? I want to be safe. And she may come back. She may decide to move on with her life. All right. Another researcher said this: solitary eggs are thus found lying forsaken all over the country and become a prey to the jackal. So other animals, the eggs are just laying around wherever. She takes care of herself. She hides herself by blending in the earth, and she'll leave her eggs if she feels threatened. She labors, but to no avail, according to the Bible here. It's plain as day. The Bible says in verse 16, she is hardened against her young ones as though they were not hers. Her labor is in vain without fear. So not a good example. Now, some men did research while hunting the ostrich. I don't know what kind of guys are out there just looking to kill ostriches, maybe for boots. But it said they observed the path of the ostrich, and as they moved in to capture the ostrich, they noted that the ostrich could have easily escaped had it changed courses. So if it would have just changed directions, it would have been fine. But the ostrich, and this is a quote, never swerves from the course he once adopts, but only increases speed. Never going to make any changes to my life. I'm just going to keep going faster at what I'm doing. That's momhood, motherhood 101 from the life of an ostrich. Now, Lamentations 4 says the people, the daughter of my people, is become like the ostrich in the wilderness. The ostrich in the wilderness doesn't care about her young. It's all about her. I want to make sure I'm safe. I want to make sure I'm taken care of. As long as I'm fine, it doesn't matter what happens to my young. And I spent a little time there because you need to see the context, because now we get to verse number 4. Lamentations 4:4, and we're going to understand it. The tongue of the sucking child, that would be an infant, cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. In other words, mom's not going to take care of the baby. The baby's thirsty, forget it. The baby's going to lay there. The baby's going to die. Because mom's all about taking care of mom. As long as I'm taken care of, I don't care what happens to the baby. Listen, an infant can't care for itself. This is not, look, we kind of live in, can I rant for about 30 seconds? You mind that? All right, appreciate that. We live in a world where moms are neglecting infants and toddlers and babying teenagers and young adults. That's weird. Flip that thing around. Infants and toddlers need special care. Whether you do natural diet, I don't care what you do, but infant babies need to be changed. You don't leave them there for hours and let them get rashes, and you don't let them stink and stuff. You take care of your babies. But when they become teenagers, tell them to go take a shower. Tell them to go clean up. You don't have to keep babying them at some. So while they're little, you care for them, you feed them, you nurture them. But at some point, they got to grow up. Tell them to grow up then. But let's stop forsaking them when they're in their most vulnerable years. And then here we are, they're 30 years old, living in our basement playing video games, and we say, well, one of these days, maybe 30 years from now, you ought to go get a job or something. No. Boot. Out the door. Go get a job. Get a life. Grow up a little bit. You can't play video games forever. Okay? So here they are, these moms. They don't care that the infants are starving to death. Now look here in verse number 4. We grow up a little bit. We're not just talking about the infants, but what about these little toddlers? The young children ask bread. They want something to eat. some of our children, and you try to grow them up out of this as quick as possible, but when they're 2, 3 years old, something like that, sometimes you got to, those of you that you don't care about this kind of stuff, but you got to cut their food into smaller pieces. You got to break stuff apart for them. You can't just hand them a piece of steak and say, hey, go for it, unless it's one of Brother Morris's, and then maybe so, but that's just the way that it works. You got to cut stuff up and you got to help them. Here's what the Bible's saying: they're not taking care of the infants. The infants are starving to death. They're thirsting to death, I guess I should say. Verse number 4: the young children, they're asking bread. Nobody will get them any. Nobody will break some off for them. Why? Because people just care about themselves. Now, I could go on and on about that, and what I would say to you is the ostrich, I'm going to say this is going to be mean, okay, but you're tough enough, you can handle it. The ostrich has babies expecting fully that somebody else will take care of the babies. The modern mom has babies expecting fully somebody else will take care of the babies. When society's mothers become like the ostrich, we're doomed. And how many generations have we had ostrich mothers now? We got a problem. Now here we go, verse 5. Here's the decline, okay? I mean, we've seen the sanctuary. I mean, it looks rough. The gold's dim. The stones are broken up and scattered all over the place. The people, in God's eyes, they were as fine gold. Now they look like earthen pitchers. I mean, this is a bad place to be. And now he says, and now we get to the most natural of loves. The most natural love is not a father to his children. It's not a children to its parents. It's not a man to his wife. It's a mom to her child. That is the most natural of loves on this planet, a mom to her child. And when the most natural of loves is gone or corrupted, you know it's bad. That's where we are. Verse 5, here we are. They that did, past tense, feed delicately, so they were enjoying the food, they were eating well. Now look what's going on. They're desolate in the streets. There's no just eating well, enjoying life, eating comfort food. Whenever you're hungry, you eat. Now there are people that are looking for a meal, and they can't find it. Look what else it says, verse number 5. They that were brought up in scarlet. Now the book of Proverbs talks about the virtuous woman in the scarlet, that she would clothe her family in scarlet. The idea is nice clothing that obviously somebody cared for you and sat down and created this clothing for you, or sewed it or whatever, bought it at the store in our day, but made this clothing specifically for you. Those that used to eat delicately, now they're desolate in the streets. Those that were brought up in scarlet, meaning their clothing showed that they were cared for, now look what they do. They embrace dunghills. Do you need me to describe dunghills? Do you get the point of what a dunghill is? It's a hill of dung. You get that? If you're really young, you'll get it the next time we go through Lamentations. I mean, we've declined. Now watch this. What are the two necessities in life? Somebody tell me one of them. Okay, food, and what was the other? Raiment. Yeah, food and raiment. Okay, look at verse number 5 again. What two things are we now lacking? Food and raiment. This is not talking about the judgment of God as in the extra things in life are missing. When the judgment of God really hits, you're not upset because cell phones are gone or computers are gone or 50 sets of clothing are gone, or you see what I'm saying? When the judgment of God really hits, people are not worried about the extras. They're looking for the necessities. In Lamentations chapter 4, we're not eating like we used to eat, and we're not clothed like we used to be clothed. Why? Because the judgment of God's come. Now, if you and I don't want to live long enough to see that happen to this country, then what we ought to be doing is we ought to be praying for the country on a daily basis. If you don't believe me, I promise you that poverty, homelessness, and all that stuff as it rises in this country, it is directly associated with a nation that turns its back on God. If you don't believe, go over to England and check out the spiritual condition of England and see how it's being overtaken by Muslims. And it is nowhere near the place that it was before this country was founded by people who were, and look, it was not a godly nation necessarily, but it had more Bible-believing Christians, and as they pushed that out, they got in the vacuum instead. They got Islam and other things, and they're going to reap the consequences. We are not too far behind. Okay? You had better be praying, and you had better be walking with God, and you'd better be witnessing to other people, because every day that we keep our mouths shut about the gospel, and every day we leave our Bible sitting on the table and we stop praying, is a day that evil is advancing in this country, and it's a day where we step another step closer to Lamentations chapter 4 in this place. I don't want to stand in the streets and watch babies die because moms are not willing to feed their babies. I don't want to see that. I don't think you want to see that. So we have to repent. We have to draw nigh to God. We have to walk with God. And you can be just like the people over in Judah. When they heard those type of messages, they ignored it until it was eyeball to eyeball right in front of them. So you can ignore it. I can ignore it. The people outside in our city, they can ignore the message that judgment's coming one day to this nation, but one day they'll see it. And when you see it face to face, it's not just an easy snap of the fingers and things go back. We don't want to go there. Lamentations chapter number 4. We're dealing with the comparison of judgment. Now that may seem odd to you, but in Lamentations chapter 4, Jeremiah is lamenting, of course, the conditions of his people, but he's lamenting the comparison between God's judgment of his people Israel and God's people, or the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. We find in Lamentations chapter 4, we're going to be in verse number 6 down to verse number 10, or down to verse number 12 this evening. Lamentations 4, verse number 6. The Bible says, "For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom, that was overthrown as in a moment, and no hands stayed on her. Her Nazarites were purer than snow. They were whiter than milk. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was of sapphire. Their visage is blacker than a coal. They are not known in the streets. Their skin cleaveth to their bones. It is withered, it is become like a stick. They that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger, for these pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the field. The hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. The Lord hath accomplished his fury. He hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. The kings of the earth and all the inhabitants of the world would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem." Now, it's kind of an odd thing that in verse number 6, I don't think, if you didn't have that Bible verse right there in front of you, I don't know that you would ever think this way. But oftentimes the way we think and the way God wants us to think are different. I would never, if I didn't have that Bible verse, I would never in my own mind say that the way God judged Judah in this particular passage in the book of Jeremiah during this time period is greater than the way God judged Sodom. I mean, think about the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, God basically rains down fire and brimstone and they're all dead. And it happens just like that. But Jeremiah is looking over, and Jeremiah knows his history. He knows how the judgment came to pass in Sodom and Gomorrah. He's not ignorant of those details. But now he's looking at the way things are going right now for the people of God, and he says, in comparison, the judgment of God on his people, Judah, is greater than the judgment of God was when he just quickly and swiftly brought down the fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. And I've thought about that much. Why would Jeremiah say that the judgment they're dealing with right now is greater? I mean, how do you get greater punishment than fire and brimstone coming down and everybody's dead? I mean, how do you get greater than that? And yet I thought about it, and I think this is the point. In Sodom and Gomorrah, when the judgment of God fell, they were just judged and it was over. But in Judah, the judgment of God has come down on them, and every morning they wake up, they've got to look at the judgment. The next day they wake up, they're still looking at the judgment. The next day they wake up, they're still looking. It's not a once and a swift act of execution where God just says fire and brimstone, everybody there's dead. The judgment of God is lingering, if you will. It's almost like a cloud hovering over the people. And it would almost be better, and I think this is what Jeremiah is saying, it would almost be better if the judgment just came and then it was over and we were either dead or whatever God's end result was, and that's just the end of it. Do you realize that that's actually what most people think about life after death, is that it's just done? That's what most people think. And so, I'll live however I want to live, and okay, let's say that I'm not saved. Well, however God judges me, it's going to be swift, and it's over, and I don't know anything, and it's done. And so people don't fear, because they don't realize, no, wait a minute, just as we have eternal life awaiting us, where we'll be in the presence of God forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, the judgment of God, the opposite of that, the wrath of God, those that are unsaved, they continue to live in a lake of fire. It's not like 15 minutes in the lake and I burn up and it's over. It's an ongoing eternal death, basically, that they'll be conscious, they'll know what's going on, they'll understand. I mean, if you go to Luke 16, the judgment of God will be ongoing forever and ever and ever. This idea, and I don't know, maybe it's the Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't remember what group came up with this idea, that you basically just, you burn up and you cease to be. Well, yeah, that's bad, but it's not. You can see some lost people reasoning through, well, if I can live my whole life, let's say I can live 60 years on this earth for myself, and then I'm going to suffer for 15 seconds or 30 seconds while I'm burning up, they might weigh that in the balance and think it's not that big of a deal. I'll live my life for me, and I'll not worry about eternal consequences, because after all, I'm going to burn up and cease to exist. But that's not the Bible picture. The Bible picture is that of a judgment that goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And Jeremiah's giving, now look, I'm not telling you that's what Jeremiah's talking about. I'm telling you this. He says, Jeremiah, and the Lord told him to put it in the Bible for us, he says, when Sodom and Gomorrah was judged, it was judged swiftly, promptly. I mean, God sends fire and brimstone, it's over. That does not compare to what they were dealing with. Every night going to bed under the judgment of God, waking up the next morning under the judgment of God. Going to bed under the judgment of God, waking up the next morning under the judgment of God. So I just want to tell you, look, this message is not necessarily a salvation message. The passage is not trying to encourage you to get saved. But while I'm here, I would just tell you something. If the devil's put thoughts in your mind that, getting saved is really not worth it because, then you got to live your life a certain way and all that kind of stuff. Well, number one, if you truly get saved, you don't need to sit around and worry about what all you're going to have to do and not get to do, because God will work in your heart and it won't seem like near the burden you feel as an unsaved person looking forward to it. Okay? But if the devil's putting thoughts in your mind that one of these days you're just going to burn up and cease to be and it's all going to be over like that, that's not true. And you say, well, are you trying to scare people into heaven? Well, I'm certainly trying to tell people the truth about hell and about the lake of fire, and that is, you're going to deal with it forever. Right. And I don't know, I don't want you to get the idea that I'm trying to tell you I understand everything about it. All I know is this. I am a literalist, and I've said this recently, so I don't want to harp on this, meaning this. I take the Bible literally unless God gives me a reason not to do so. Well, when I take the Bible literally and I think, what is the lake of fire going to be like? I have to think, because I don't have any reason to believe anything else, I have to believe it's a lake that's not water, it's fire. The Bible talks about a bottomless pit. The Bible talks about, those kind of things. It makes you think that maybe the lake of fire is a bottomless body of fire that is there anybody here scared of water? You're a little scared of water? Okay, there are people that are scared of water. There are people who are scared of water that will get into it as long as they can stand on the bottom and they can keep their head and your upper body out of the water. So there are people who have varying degrees of fear. There have been people that said, I want to get baptized, but I'm scared of water, and so I'm nervous about following the Lord. And I understand that. The idea is, look, if I can put my feet on the bottom, I can feel some level of comfort. Can you imagine being in a lake of fire where there's no putting your feet on the bottom? And I don't know how it's going to be, but it's an ongoing, eternal judgment. Jeremiah says, the judgment we're facing right now as a nation is greater. The punishment is greater than it was on Sodom and Gomorrah. That's serious. Okay? Because when you got to wake up with it and you can't just, look, people have said before, they were, maybe praying to the Lord, maybe worried about things they'd done, and they've said, Lord, just kill me. Just take me out. And I understand that, but to some degree, the idea of chastening is ongoing thinking through what I've done and understanding and living with and dealing with the consequences and the guilt maybe. And so here, I just want to draw your attention to some of those things as we're here. Listen, if you're here tonight and you're not saved, you are, whatever reason you have, whether it's fear, apprehension, maybe you don't think it's going to be that big of a deal, maybe you're not even sure you believe in a God, you need to understand something. You are messing around with your eternity. You can't measure eternity. I've lived on this earth now 40 years, and it really doesn't seem like that long of an amount of time when I look back. Now, if you'd asked me when I was 10, look forward, 30 years, I would have told you it would have felt like forever. But looking back, 40 years is nothing. Eternity is forever. It's forever. And it's not going to, listen, the old saying is, time flies when you're having what? Fun. You think time's flying for people in hell right now? I would say the smallest amount of time you could measure feels like forever. Don't play around with that. Don't play around with that. That's a horrible judgment. Now, Lamentations chapter 4, verse 6, the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom. And I think this is the point he's making. Here it is, verse 6, that was overthrown as in a moment. See, Sodom and Gomorrah, it was overthrown just like that. We don't have, that's not what we're dealing with in Lamentations. It's ongoing. He said there in verse number 6, and no hands stayed on her. There was nothing that they didn't continue to be. They didn't go on through this judgment for a long period of time. It happened in a moment, and then it was over. But he said, for us, it's not that way. Now watch this, verse number 7, because I think he's going to kind of get a little descriptive here and help us to understand what some of the things they're dealing with. We've got bits and pieces as we've gone through this book of the Bible, but verse number 7, her Nazarites. Now, talking about the daughter, just so you can see this, look at verse number 6, the daughter of my people. Now, verse number 7, her Nazarites. So we're talking about Israel, and Israel's being, or specifically Judah, they're being pictured as a woman, and now we're talking about her Nazarites. Now, Nazarites, we don't have time to go to Numbers chapter 6 and go through the Nazarite vow, but a Nazarite would be seen as someone, let me say this carefully, maybe superior spirituality. This is someone that has made a decision to keep himself separate from some things in the world because he wants to devote himself to God. And so he would take a vow on himself and say, I want to set myself apart for the Lord, and I'm going to deprive myself of some worldly pleasures in order to walk with God in a special way. Sometimes that vow would be a temporary vow. At the end of the thing, he would cut his hair. There was all sorts of details on this vow. Numbers, I believe it's chapter 6. You can go read more about the vow. But the idea when we're talking about her Nazarites, we're talking about those that have chosen to have a spiritual walk with God and refuse some things in the world. And then look down to verse number 10. We're going to come back to verse 7, obviously, and deal with it. But verse number 10, the hands of the pitiful women. Now, when you read that, here again, our modern terminology messes with our minds. These women are pitiful. Well, how do you take that? Do you take that as meaning they're horrible? You say, well, yeah, because the context, no, hold on a second. These women were full, at one time they were full of pity. That's so horrible for me to do this, but that is the most simplistic definition I can give you. At one point they were full of pity. Now when you say something, when you go out somewhere after church tonight and eat something and they bring it out to you and you take a bite and you say, that's pitiful. Well, you probably mean something quite different than what the Bible means here. Now, you may think these women are the other kind of pitiful, but they weren't always that way. At one point, they were full of pity for others. Okay? And I'm going to show you that. So we're talking about two ways to gauge or judge how things are going in Israel. Now, look at verse 7. Let's go back up there. All right. Her Nazarites were. Do you see that? W-E-R-E. That means present tense or past tense. What is it? Past tense. Her Nazarites were purer than snow. They, what's that word? Were whiter than milk. Past tense, right? They were more ruddy in body than rubies. Their polishing was, past tense again, was of sapphire. Now look at verse 8. Their visage, do you see the shift? All right, so verse number 7, we're talking about how they used to be. Verse number 8, we're talking about how they are now. Well, what's the difference? Well, one is prior to the judgment of God that's come in this, in this time frame, and the next one is here's how things are going right at the present. So, verse number 7, they were purer than snow. That's a good thing. They lived pure lives. They were whiter than milk. That's clean. They were more ruddy in body than rubies. It's talking about their bodily appearance. That they looked healthy. They looked good. Their polishing was of sapphire. You could see things on their countenance. Just everything about them. They were in good shape. They were healthy. I don't mean like they were going to the gym, working out, stuff like that. You could tell that they were, even though they had sacrificed some things, they weren't starving to death. They were living they've set themselves apart to the Lord, but they're still living a healthy life. They're eating meals, okay? They're not starving. They're not dying by the side of the road from a lack of food. That's the way things used to be. The spiritual giants, if you will, that's probably not a good terminology, but those that were seemed or deemed spiritual, they were doing well. Verse number 8, now their visage is blacker than a coal. Well, that's not healthy. Okay? That's not healthy. They are not known in the streets. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but a Nazarite would be somebody that people would know, that's a Nazarite. That would be something that would be seen as a positive thing. Now, they're not even known in the streets. Listen, when you live in a society, now I'm going to try my best not to rant, but no, meddle. I'm going to try my best not to meddle tonight, but I am going to try to get you to think about things in the present based on some things we learned from the past. When they got to a place where nobody knew or cared about those who had made decisions to live separate, holy lives for the Lord, when a nation got to a place where they cared not for those who had set their lives apart for the glory of God, that nation is in a bad place. Can I tell you that in this country, the posters hanging on the walls in the bedrooms of young people, it's not missionaries who have sacrificed their lives for the cause of Christ. It's people like LeBron James, who, if I'm not mistaken, this past week called another basketball player, one that's been out of basketball for quite some time, called him God. So when we are putting rock stars, country music stars, rap stars, basketball stars, baseball stars, football stars, soccer, whatever it is, when we are putting those people on our walls and we are admiring and looking up to and adoring and hoping one day I can be like this person, and we have no idea who the missionaries are that are going without meals so that people can hear the gospel of Christ. We are a nation under the judgment of God, and we don't even know it. I'm just telling you the truth. When you're in a day and time where we only know about the preachers who made the news because they did something wicked, and we only know about people because, when they get caught doing something wrong, and then we talk about them, but we don't know those that are making sacrifices. They're not known in the streets. Those that are making sacrifices for Christ, we don't care, we don't know, we don't acknowledge, we don't care to know. But we do idolize the people that we idolize, we're in trouble. Major, major trouble. Now listen to me, okay? Because some of you are writing me off right now. And I'm just trying to help you. So you can take it or leave it. Can I just speak? I'm going to go off script here. I grow a little weary pouring my heart out to people Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, and trying to tell you things that I know will help you if you'll listen to me. And then one of these days you get in trouble and your life gets a little messed up, and you come to me and you say, what can I do, and why this and why that? And I've got to be a good pastor, a good guy, and say, well, I don't know why this happened. Maybe it was something else out here. And the truth is, it probably happened because you stopped listening in church services. And you stopped reading your Bible, and you stopped praying, and this became more of a joke. It's just Sunday night, it's just Pastor Ray, he's just up there talking again. And you're taking light the things that I'm saying to you. And I know that I can see it. I can see the countenance. I get it. And you think I'm stupid. I probably would have thought I was stupid when I was your age. But what I'm telling you is it's not stupid. This is real life stuff. And we're in real trouble. And while we're playing games, living half-hearted Christian lives, and we're getting more and more distance between us and our walk with God, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to have some major regrets. Why didn't I listen more? Why didn't I take notes? Or why didn't I pay attention? Why didn't I, Pastor Ray talked about this stuff. Why didn't I listen? And you may have made some mistakes in your life during that 5-10 year period of time that I can't help you undo. So it's not, look, I got other things I can be doing. If you think, that I'm just such a boring old dude that, I don't have anything else I could do with my life, I promise you there are other things I could do with my life. I chose to do this because I believe this is what God wants me to do to help people. At one point in my life, I wanted to be a school teacher and a coach because I believed that was how I was going to help people. And while I was in college at the University of Tennessee, sitting in class, God started changing my mind. I want you to help people, but you're not going to help people in a classroom and on a sports field. I want you to help people behind a pulpit. So that's why I'm here tonight. I'm here to try to give you some things that will help you. We're in Lamentations chapter 4, and I'm telling you, the Nazarites, nobody cared about them anymore. Why? Because they're under the judgment of God. And the truth is, throughout the week, how often do you think about somebody like Brother and Sister Holt? Who, Brother Holt's over on the mission field right now, and his wife's here in the States because she don't have good enough health to go with him. And you think, well, what kind of a husband would do that? Well, the kind of husband that talked to God and talked to his wife, and between him and God and his wife, they decided, what? If military soldiers will go to Iraq or Afghanistan for this country and spend some time on a foreign field away from family, why shouldn't a soldier of God go to the mission field and spend some time away from his if that's what he has to do and if that's what she has to do? And they're people that are they're spiritual people who are living lives that I wouldn't want to leave my wife at home. I wouldn't want to leave my family at home. But you know what? If God asked me to do something, would I do it? But all week long, all we can think about is, oh, did you hear about this singer? And did you hear about that singer? You want me to tell you something? You can put all those people, all the singers that Hollywood has, all the actors and actresses, all the sports stars, you can put them all in a bucket and they are vanity. Every one of them added together. They are doing nothing for this world. But you take a guy that's out in the middle of the jungles, and his wife's at home, and he's there right now telling people about Jesus Christ. You don't know him. I don't know him. The world doesn't know him. We don't think about him. But that guy's actually doing something that matters. That's where the nation of Israel got when they were under the judgment of God, is they didn't care about those that were spiritual, but their minds would be consumed with other worldly people. Now, maybe now we got your attention. I don't know. We'll see if we can hold it for a few seconds. Now, these folks, they're not known in the streets. Look what it says in verse number 8. Their skin cleaveth to their bones. Now you know what that means, don't you? What does that mean? What does it mean when their skin's cleaving to their bones? They're starving. Nobody's making sure they eat. Nobody cares whether they eat or not. It's just the Nazarites. It is withered, verse number 8 says, and that's messed up. It has become like a stick. I don't know how God could get any more descriptive than He did right there in verse number 8. Now look at verse number 9. This is another one of those phrases that seems odd until you stop and think about it. They that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger. Now think about that. I don't care how you're slain, it's not good. Wouldn't you agree with that? So whichever way, how do you want to die? Well, dying is dying, but it says no, not quite. He said it's better for those people that were, the enemy came in, I don't want to get graphic with you or anything, but stabs them with the sword, pulls the sword out, they fall down, they're dead. He said it's better for those people than it is the people that are starving to death, because it's a slow, painful death. Listen, some of the hardest decisions I've seen people make in hospitals, and you know this if you've been around death at all, is when to stop the feeding and those kind of things, because in your mind you think, I don't want my loved ones to what? Starve to death. That's because in your mind you're thinking, that is a painful thing. I don't ever want to be around when somebody starves to death. Here's what he's saying. These Nazarites, the people that are living, he says it was better when the sword just came in and people pierced them and they died on the spot. He said the people that are dying now, day one they're hungry, no food. Day 2 they're hungry, no food. Day 3 they're hungry. I don't know how many days it is they could have gone, and I know it varies different people, but however many days they're going, and they're starving to death. And he said that's horrible. That's what's going on. Now look what he says there in the verse, okay? And I got to hasten a little bit here. Verse number 9. He said, for these pine away, stricken through the want, which is the idea of that is the lack, the want of the fruits of the field. They go out to the field, there's nothing there. Can you imagine starving? And you come upon a place where there's a field there and you think, surely I'm going to get something here. And you get up to it. Can you imagine the disappointment of walking into the field thinking I'm going to, praise the Lord, I'm going to get something. And you get in there and all your hopes are dashed because there's nothing to eat. Now listen, I've said this for weeks now. I'm going to say it again. Take it or leave it, okay? At some point, if the Lord tarries His coming, things are going to take a turn in this country. And some of the things we're reading about in Lamentations are going to be real life. Now, those of us raised on grocery stores, we think there's no way that's true. Because all you have to do is you go to the grocery store and there's food there, and you get the food from the grocery store and you go home. Can I ask you to think about something with me? Where does the grocery store get the food? Okay? Now, I know we got packaging and all that kind of, I'm talking about the fruit, the vegetables, all that. Where does that stuff come from? It comes from farmers. So if farmers plant crops, now listen to me. 1 year, farmers go out, they plant, and they get nothing. How long do you think it's going to take before you start going to your little grocery store and showing them your little Kroger card and telling them you want some groceries, and they look at you and they say, we're sorry, we don't have any. So when the judgment of God comes, if we're here, now I'm not trying to scare you and say you're going through Daniel's 70th week. We're not going through Daniel's 70th week, but it wouldn't take much at all. Listen, you all have no idea how quickly this nation could be turned upside down. and how quickly we could have no food, how quickly our water supply could be messed up, how quickly everything we know and love and think is always going to be there, how quickly it could go away, and you go to the grocery store and it wouldn't matter how much money you've got, they have nothing to give you. You go to the gas station to put gasoline in your car, there's no gas. You better quit playing around and messing around. You better get a real walk with God, because at some point the Lord might just withhold some blessings from us and say, okay, now let's see how much you love me. Look at verse number 10. Verse number 10. I don't know. I sure hope this is sinking in. I hope that I'm not getting in the way of the Lord working in your hearts, because I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like some of us just think this is light. This is not light. Verse 10, the hands of the pitiful women who at one point in their lives had pity, have sodden their own children. You get the idea of that? They're boiling their children in water. Moms boiling their children in water to eat them. That's what it says right here, verse number 10. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. There's a thing going around right now, and I don't know anything about this person. I have no idea, none whatsoever. I don't know whether it's a good person, bad person. But there is a lady that has a blog, and she pushes, now this is my understanding, she pushes or promotes godly women being godly moms and godly wives, and those kind of things. And she encourages, she uses modern versions, so I'm obviously not condoning everything she teaches or does or anything of the sort. But she's trying to push women, young women particularly, and this is what she says, that her purpose is to teach young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be godly moms, and to be godly wives. Well, apparently she created a chart and talked about the difference between stay-at-home moms and working moms, and it went viral. And now everybody and their brother is attacking this woman. And what they're saying is, I don't know whether she meant to do this, or I have no idea, but they're saying she is shaming moms who work jobs outside the home and basically take their children to daycares and stuff like that. And all over the place, even Bible-believing moms are coming out of the woodwork, and they're all attacking this woman. Now here again, I'm not here to vouch for the woman, because I have no idea whether she's teaching right or wrong things. What I am trying to say to you is, we live in a time now where we are praising. Think about some of the moms that people are praising in Hollywood. Oh, we're so proud of her. Look, she's such a good mother. Well, is she a good mother? And we're going to bash this one woman because she's trying to encourage young ladies to stay at home and be wives and mothers. You better pull back the reins on some of the social media garbage. You better call a timeout in your life and take a step back, because you start shaming somebody you don't have any idea who they are, what they stand for. And we're going to praise women out in the world who are ungodly, but we're going to praise them as role model mothers. And we're going to shame women who are trying to promote the idea of being good moms and good wives. The Bible says in the book of Isaiah, woe, woe, when you begin to call evil good and you begin to call good evil. In Lamentations, women are cooking, I don't know how better to say that. They are cooking their babies to eat them. How do you get any lower? The spiritual giants are starving to death in the streets. The most natural love is supposed to be a mom for her children. Do you see what they're doing? They at one point had pity. They would have not only cared for their own children, they would have cared for other people's children. Do you remember days like that? Some of you do. You remember times where you could go out and play in your yard, and everybody in the neighborhood kind of knew each other. We don't know anybody anymore. But everybody in the neighborhood knew each other. And so if your children were 3 houses down, it was okay because that mama would take care of your children just like you'd take care of your children. And if your children were over at your house, you'd take care of that mama's children just like you would your own children. So that's natural. But now, as things decline, you don't trust many mamas with your children. And as things continue to decline, there's not going to be a mama in the world that's trustworthy of how she's going to deal with her children. You see what's going on here? These women at one point had pity. They cared. They would never think to hurt somebody's child, much less their own child. But now they're sodden. I mean, they're boiling. That's what it means, boiling in water. They've sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Now, verse 11, verse 12, and I'm done. All this is because Israel sinned against God. They ignored God's warnings. God said, if you don't do right, I'm going to have to bring my judgment. Verse 11 says, the Lord hath accomplished his fury. He hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. I would say certainly the foundations have been devoured, wouldn't you? The foundations of spirituality, the Nazarites. The foundations of just love. Look at the bombs. Everything's out of whack. It's messed up. It's backwards. It's unnatural. This is not the way that it's supposed to be. But it's this way because God had to bring judgment on a people that ignored him. Now watch verse number 12. Not only are we seeing bad things there, but look at verse 12. The kings of the earth. So that's not the king of Judah or the king of Israel. This is the kings outside. I mean, these are the kings of all the earth here and all the inhabitants of the world. So everybody's looking on at Israel, at Judah right now in this passage, and they're all looking on with surprise. Look what it says. They would not have believed that the adversary and the enemy should have entered into the gates of Jerusalem. They would have never believed that. These are people who did not have a walk with God. But if you would have gone to one king over here of this nation and said, hey, the day's coming where the enemies are going to enter into the gates of Jerusalem, that king would have said, it'll never happen. It will never happen. God has so protected those people, it'll never happen. If you would have went to the inhabitants of this nation over here and said, hey, the judgment of God's coming and people are going to, the enemies and the adversaries are going to enter into the gates of Jerusalem, those people, all the inhabitants of the world, the kings of the earth, they would have said, it'll never happen. God has so much favor on those people and he has so blessed those people. There is no way that will happen. And now, here it is. And I wonder how many people are sitting around the world today, how many people are sitting in churches today, the judgment of God, it'll never happen. It will never happen. It will never happen. You wouldn't believe it if a preacher stood up here and told you the judgment is coming. And you won't believe it, just like they wouldn't have believed it, but it came to pass. And I'm here to tell you, mark me down as a crazy doom and gloom guy, that's fine, I don't care. It is going to come to pass again. And it's going to come in this country. We have done far too much wickedness. We are now accepting far too much wickedness. And we think it's okay. And it's not just in the world now. It's now in churches. What ought to be the haven of spirituality in this country is nothing more than a social nightclub with the word church on it. And God is disgusted by what's going on in this country. And God will have to apologize to Sodom, Gomorrah, and Judah, and Israel, and a whole bunch of other nations if at some point He doesn't lower the boom on this country. Mark me down as crazy if you want. That's fine. But I stand here as someone pouring out his heart, trying to tell you, you better wake up, because bad days are coming before the good days get here in heaven. you better make sure you've got some sort of a walk with God. You better make sure you've got a Bible reading life, a prayer life, and some fellowship with God. Because when the judgment hits and you're hungry and you have no food and no clothing and none of the stuff you think you need, boy, it's going to get a little rough then. You better learn to walk with God now.